Hello, I'm here to talk about improving pattern libraries with Polymer. I realise you're all JavaScript developers, so pattern libraries might not be something you're used to. So I'm going to go over them first. My talk was a little bit longer than I thought it was going to be. So really quickly, I work here, I organise this. What's a pattern library? Pattern library is a coded style guide. It's a collection of code examples. It's basically a bit like Bootstrap. I'm sure most of you have used Bootstrap before. Bootstrap's basically a pattern library. Foundation, jQuery UI, they're in essence pattern libraries as well. They allow us to have a separation of concerns between the front and the back end. So I know as long as my code as a front-end developer works and I can put that on the pattern library, all you need to do is copy the little code snippets, put them in your app, and they'll work. They're pretty freaking awesome. Here's an example we have. This is one that's been taken from the Twitter Bootstrap. So basically, copy the code on the right-hand side, get the element on the left-hand side. Same thing again from another pattern library we did before. This is a pagination and a mood board. Copy this, get this. That's the basics of a pattern library. So what's the problem with them? I wouldn't be here talking about how we should improve them if they didn't need improving. First issue is there's lots of copying and pasting. So here's another element from another pattern library I did. Basically, you can search for a location. It'll give you the long and lat. You can do it in reverse. You can move the little marker about. This is the code you need to copy to get that on. That's the markup you need to copy. All the JS and the CSS, they'll be included, but you still need to copy a lot of code to get it on in your app. As a result of that, the code can be hard to understand. If it's not code you've written, again, I'm going to bring up this same example. If you need to go into that and change anything, you've got to try and work out where it is you need to change it. I mean, you could do it, but you'd need to read through it. Most importantly of all, they are very difficult to maintain. So I'm going to jump back to the pagination element because it's a lot simpler. It's a lot easier to take to pieces. But let's say the designer comes to you and he says, the pagination we've got's not working. We want a new pagination, and we want this pagination to look like this. That's fine. I can go away, I can make that. I can get the markup for that. I can change the JS and the CSS as needed. But the problem is the markup now looks like this instead of this, which is all over the app. So you'd need to find everywhere in the pattern line, in your app, where you have this code, copy this from the pattern library, and replace these. The markup changes really funk you up. I'm trying my best not to swear, so you'll notice the little changes in words there. We try to get around this with putting in proper version numbers and proper releases, which is weird as a front-end developer. I'm not used to that. We put change logs in, so we'd say there's been a break in change, make sure you update all your markup, but it's not ideal. So is it really a separation of concerns? Not quite. I mean, it's good, but it's not right. So I went to Polymer. I found Polymer about a year ago, and it blew my mind. It's awesome. So what is Polymer? Polymer is a web component framework, so it allows you to make web components much, much easier. It's a bit like jQuery is to JavaScript, where everything you can do in jQuery, you can do in JavaScript. Everything you can do with Polymer, you can do with web components. It just makes it a little bit easier to get going. It's also a collection of web components, so they have their own little web components. There's the core elements and the paper elements, I believe, but we're not bothered about them for now. I do suggest you take a look at them though, because they are fantastic. So what are web components? If Polymer helps us use web components, what are they? Web components are a set of standards currently being developed. I'm not going to read through that, that's far too long. Basically, they allow you to create your own HTML elements. So you can make your own little HTML tags. You can then contain your styles within them. So this uses a thing called something I've forgotten about and should have really written in my speaker notes, but I haven't. So basically, any styles that you put inside a web component will only affect that web component. They won't leak out. They won't affect the rest of your app. And vice versa, the rest of your app won't affect the styles in your web component. I'll go over these a little bit more later. And you can also utilize lifecycle callbacks. So events like when the element's been created, when attributes have changed on the element, you can use JavaScript triggers from within the element to, well, just use them. They allow a separation of concerns, and they're pretty freaking awesome. So the obvious step here is to mix them together. So I'm going to bring up the pagination component from before. This is the revised one. This is the code we used to need in the pattern library to make this element. Using Polymer, that turns into this, which is a lot simpler. All you need to do is copy this, and you get this. It's actually a little bit more than that because we need to tell it what the current page is and where the total pages are, but you get the idea. It's still a lot simpler than what it was before. So how do we make that? We're going to make a new web component. We're going to start a new file. And the first thing we do is import Polymer. Now, as I said before, you don't need Polymer. It makes it a lot easier. You can make them all with JavaScript or vanilla. They're all built into the browser, but Polymer does make it a lot easier, especially for me, who is not the best JS developer. Shouldn't be admitting that here. So yeah, we start a new file, and this is us importing Polymer. This is a HTML import. It's one of the new parts of web components. Basically, Polymer itself is a bit of a web component. I include that in here, and it allows me to use this, which says I'm creating a new Polymer element, and I'm passing the name in here of my pagination. So that's the name that the element will have. So if I make an element, a tag with my pagination, this will load in, this will work. There's a little bit of a weird kind of caveat with these. You need to include a dash in the name. This is to avoid conflict with existing elements. So say the new HTML spec decided that there was going to be a pagination element. There won't be, but they're not going to use a dash. So we use dashes to make sure we don't conflict with them. Add in the attributes. So this is the total pages and the current page attribute that we used before. We don't need them. They're optional, but because we're going to use them, you include them in here. Then we start on the template. So this is where all your code will go. This is where the markup will come through. This is where your styles will go. I'm going to go over that a little bit more later because first I want to talk about the scripts. Your scripts go outside the template. This is where the lifecycle callbacks come in. So this is where you'd say when this element's loaded, when the DOM's loaded, when attributes have changed, run this code on this element. They will only run on this element. You can't pull it out and change things in your app because that's not what it's meant. It's supposed to be completely contained. Because we're not using scripts on this pagination, we'll take the scripts out and we need to add a no script attribute there. Otherwise your element won't load. I'm not sure why it is exactly. I think it's because it's waiting for you to tell it to do something on ready. This will just load it in straight away. So this is a web component. That's finished. That's done. It'll load nothing in there because there's no markup and there's no styles, but that's all you need to start a web component. I'll jump in at the actual template part. So that's just this template here. I've just pulled the rest of the code out so it's a little bit easier to see what's going on. So first thing we've done is paste in the code from the original pattern library. This is just a straight up paste. It's exactly what the old pattern library had. Now if you include the my pagination element from before, you'll get this. You also need to include the styles, which I've done as a link there to a style sheet. A lot of people use inline styles there. Makes me feel a little bit icky though, to be honest. And it would also make this slide a lot bigger, so I've just included a style sheet there. Any of the styles in this style sheet will only affect the elements in this component. They won't affect anything outside of it. So if I was to put in my style sheet and colour all of the links blue, which they already will be, so I'll pick a different colour, I'll colour them all green. It'll only colour the links in here, it won't bleed out, and it won't colour the links in the rest of your app. They're pretty safe. Same with the input. If I made all the inputs massive, it's only going to affect the inputs inside the element. It's not going to affect the rest of your app. And the same works in reverse. If you decide to make all your inputs massive on your app, they won't be affected in here. There's ways around that. You can come out with a scope. You can, with shadow and deep. Not going to go into them. There's plenty of talks about them. I only have 20 minutes. So what we're going to do is bring in the attributes from before. You remember we had total pages and current page. You can see them on the max and the value and in that span there. If you've used things like Mustache or Liquid Tags or Twig or loads of different templating languages, these should be really familiar to you. It's really, really straightforward. It's really simple. Anything you pass into the attributes get passed into here. You can do little bits of logic on them. Again, read up on it. I'm not going to go into that here. Actually, I am. That's my next slide, I've just realised. So, taking this pagination paddle at the top, the very first one for previous, two template blocks inside that template. Again, I've chopped out the rest of the code to make it easier to read. Something's going mental with me clicker. So if the current page is 1, so it's the first page, include the disabled class because there's not going to be a previous one. Unfortunately, Polymer doesn't have an else clause, which is really annoying. I'm sure there's reasons. So what we've had to do is do another if statement that says if it's not equal to 1, just include the normal paddle. So that template block will only show up if that if statement is true, and same with the second one. So we've written our element, our component. What we want to do now is use it. So this is a really stripped down document, but basically you use them HTML imports again, and we include the pagination element that we made. Normally I would have a separate document that's just all the elements, and then I would include elements.html. But because there's only one, I'll just include it straight away here. And then the next step is just to use it. And that's it. It's that simple. Include it at the top, use your tag, and you're done. And you can nest these. I mean, it won't work too well with the pagination, but you know, if you've used Angular directives before, very similar to that. Obviously, there's slight differences, but very, very similar. So what does this solve? If you remember the problems we had before, one issue was lots of copying and pasting. I'll come back to this element. If you remember before, this one, yeah, this was the code we had. It's a mess. This is the code we have for it now. It's a lot simpler. All you need to do is copy that element. You don't even need the long and lat if you put defaults in there. So now there's some copying and pasting. Obviously you can't get away with no copying and pasting. There's still a bit to do, but it's certainly a lot simpler. The code was hard to understand. This is I mean, it doesn't even fit on the slide. It's mental. It's this now. That's a piece of piss. All I need to know is that I put my long and lat in there. I don't need to go searching through here and find where the long and lat is. I don't even think it's on the screen. I think it's somewhere off this side. I'll plug them in there. I don't need to worry about how the element works. I just need to know that it does work. The code is now super easy to understand. And the big one from before, it was difficult to maintain. So let's say the pagination looked like this before. This was the markup for it. This is what you had to include on your app to get it to work. The designer comes to you, he says, I want to change it. I want it to look like this. I'd then go away, I'd update the element, I'd make sure all the attributes were pulled into the right place, and then on your app, it still looks like this. It's exactly the same. You don't need to change anything. As long as you include the new element, it'll work. All the styles are included in the element, all the scripts that are needed to make it work are included within the element, all the markups included within the element. It just works. It's easy to maintain now. It's a true separation of concerns, I think. I haven't tested it fully yet. No doubt I'll be annoyed at this in 6 months as well. It's pretty awesome. So the big question with web components that always comes up is, can we use them now? And well, yeah, kind of. You can, and you know what's coming now. These slides are a little bit behind there. So it's made by Google, so Chrome, they support it. As usual, if Chrome supports it, Opera generally supports it. And Firefox, they kind of support it. It's nearly there, they're getting there. There's a few bits, I think it's with the Shadow DOM and stuff that they're not quite there on, but they'll get there. The Safari, not so much. And I'm not sure I need to tell you about IE. No, they don't support them. But they are polyfills. Polyfills do exist for them. They were originally made by Polymer, but they've since been moved out of Polymer and just brought into the web components main thing, I guess you could say. So if you go on webcomponents.org, they're all on there, and they are good. And they mean that now they still work in Chrome, obviously. They still work in Opera. Firefox has sorted themselves out. Safari have sorted themselves out. And even better than all of that, IE still haven't sorted themselves out. It's IE 11 Plus only, unfortunately. 10 kind of supports it in the way that Firefox kind of support it without the polyfills. Anything below that, you're knackered. So use it where you can. If you have a daft side project, you have something that doesn't require IE, it doesn't require, well, Safari, well, you can use the polyfills. If you have something where you can control your dev environment, like the last talk, which sounds fantastic, and I need to figure out how you can convince a client to do that. Yeah, use it where you can. Things can only get better. The more we use them, the more support they'll have, the more chance they have of being pushed into the browsers, mainly Safari. So, some more stuff for you. I made a little example of a pattern library using the pagination component I showed there. I'll maybe add some bits to it. It's not massive, but it's a good way of showing you an example of how it's used. That's up on GitHub. I'm Sam D. Beckham on pretty much anything, Twitter, GitHub, Instagram, if that's your thing. It's not mine. Come find me after. I'll point you to this. If you're interested in Polymer, which I hope you are, polymerproject.org. That's the official Polymer website, and it's actually built with Polymer, which is fantastic. It really shows that you can use it in the real world. I'm going to quickly skip over these. I'm being shouted at by an iPad. Webcomponents.org, that's where you look for everything to do with web components. This is where your polyfills are. And if you look at anything other than cat photos on Reddit, subscribe to this subreddit. It's not massive at the moment, but if we can grow it, we can get more people supporting each other, it'd be fantastic. Thank you very much.